By far, one of the biggest issues I see on a day-to-day basis teaching golf lessons is the club shaft just getting too steep in transition, right? Happens every day. Most players steepen it too much from the top of the swing. And I like to think of it in three phases to fix it for players. So I like to go face, path, and pivot. So I want to make sure that the club face is going to incentivize the right movement during the golf swing, use the face to help fix the path, and then use the path to help fix the pivot. In certain situations, when the pivot is really, really bad, I'll work on that first. But if we can use that order of operations to help the player hit better golf shots or make better golf swings, I can give them a swing that'll last for a while. The thing to understand, though, is a big reason I think players from the top of the swing are steepening the shaft is they're doing their best to try to rotate the forearms to get the club face to point left enough so they can hit a decently straight or faded shot. So a lot of times when we start fixing the face first, the player starts hitting big pulls. That's okay, right? Intuitively, if you see that ball going to the left more often, there's a good chance you'll start kind of then dropping the club more to the inside, swinging to the right. So the things I see in the backswing that create problems with the club face, obviously number one is going to be the grip. If the grip is in a weak position and I take the club to hip high, the toe is too open. Even with a flat wrist, the toe feels very open. And so then in the downswing, the player is going to start steepening the shaft. You can see how that kind of closes the face, swings it to the left, and we're hitting usually swipey fades from there. So if the grip's in a better position where I've got the thumb of my left hand on the right side of the club and I cover with my right hand, I can still see players then start to roll the club face open in the backswing, right? A lot of times there's just a lot of momentum to start the swing, or they're not using their pivot enough early. So they just start rolling the club face to the inside, getting the toe too open. Then we kind of lift our arms. And again, transition is the shaft is steepening in an effort to try to close the face enough to start it far enough for my leftward path. So what I have players do is I try to get them to sense and feel like as they're taking the club away, they're essentially kind of taking the right hand and bending it back slightly. That's essentially how I want them to hinge the club, where they're feeling a little bit of pull up with this right index finger. And as they're doing that, the club face doesn't rotate. A lot of times I have them feel it even more closed early, but ideally I like to kind of get into a position where the left wrist is bowed or flat at the top of the swing. Because now as I come over the top and steepen this thing, the face closes so early and I start hitting these low pulls left. So a player who's getting the face too open and coming over the top, right? Topping the ball, slicing the ball, whatever the shot you're seeing there, we can start to fix that by teaching that player how to hit pulls and hooks, because they'll start reacting differently to the club face. So again, as I'm taking it back, I want to feel like that right hand stays more on top of the shaft. Ideally, the club face would match up with my spine angle right here. And as I would get to the top of the swing, I'd continue to bend the right wrist back until it was in a flatter position or even a bowed position at the top of the backswing. I definitely prefer my players to be in a stronger position at the top. I think that makes it a lot easier for them to kind of lower the shaft, shallow the club, get it more from the inside. And now we're in a position here where we're going to swing far enough to the right to hit either a pretty straight shot or a draw there. So as you're taking the club away to fix the club face, two things, right? Number one, we're going to bend the right wrist back very early. Number two, we're going to try to hinge the club out in front a little bit so we get the club working on the correct path. Get to the top of the swing. Now we're in a position where the left wrist, the club face match up. And then now I can start to get the club to the inside. Most likely when you first start working on this, as you feel the face more closed going back, and then you steepen it, you're going to hit pulls, right? So again, we talked about face, path, pivot. So this is where we can start to feel the path work differently. So I'm a player who rotates the forearms too early and steepens the shaft. Well, now I've got the club face in a position at the top of the swing where it's much easier for me to do this movement. So keep the club out in front, keep the club face closed, and then from the top, what we're doing is we're just essentially kind of reconnecting the right tricep to the torso as we keep our back to the target, right? So this is what is often referred to as like the Justin Rose drill, where he's just keeping his back to the target and kind of lowering the arms. That's all I want a player to do to swing the club from inside the target line. If the club face is in a pretty decent position here and we lower it, now it's in a pretty decent position there. If I were to do that from the old golf swing position, I'd get the club face very open here, right? And then I would go to lower it and it would stay very open. So that player's probably going to stall their pivot and flip the club a lot coming through, or they're just going to hit it into right field. So we've got the club working back a lot better. Wrist is in a good position at the top. And then now we're just kind of rehearsing this feel. What I tell players to do in that situation is essentially just try to start the ball as far right of the target as you can. Most won't swing that far to the right. And if they do, we could always add a little bit more leftward on the way through. But I want them to kind of get the understanding of the club having kind of the reverse loop that they were creating. So they were wrapping it to the inside, steepening the shaft. I want to see that loop go the other way. Not very extreme. To them, it may feel extreme, but just essentially keeping the club head out in front with the face more closed, and then dropping the club to the inside. Again, get to the top, face is more closed, drop it in, start the ball to the right of the target. If I can start getting the club lowering, right, then I can start improving my pivot a little bit. And so the typical thing that I see players talk about is early extension or not rotating enough through impact. And most times that's the last thing I work on with players, is trying to get them to keep their hips deeper or rotate more through. I want to see the club face being in a better position early, especially at the top, and then early on in transition. So club face good here, club face good here. Okay, so now I've got the face working for me, where I can get the club to now swing from inside the target line. Very difficult, can't say this enough. The face gets too open, it's really difficult to swing the club from the inside or get rid of the flip. So you just don't have very good control of the club face. So club face is in a good spot. I'm lowering the arms. And then essentially we see, okay, what does the pivot look like? Did we need to work on it during this phase to try to get the player to move the pelvis to the right a little bit, create some rotation, and move it back to left? That can help the path of the club a lot. So there are times where, I will use the pivot with a player to start working on that first to try to fix a lot of these other things. But I honestly think that fixing the takeaway in the club face is one of the best fixes I can make for a player, and one of the easiest for the player to implement, because it changes so much so early and creates a much better sequence for that player. So once we get into the pivot, things that I tend to see that players struggle with is the concept of recentering, and it's so important to be able to do this. So recentering, or moving left early, as you may have heard it called, is essentially I'm going to bump my hips slightly to the right to start my swing, and then by the time I get to the top, I'm starting to move my pelvis back towards the target. A lot of times as I'm still turning closed, and definitely as the club is still moving to the top of the swing. So I'm moving to the right early, the club's still moving behind me as I'm moving on the left side. That also makes it a lot easier for the club to kind of do this motion from the top of the swing. So I try to see if a player can do that move, but if they're in a position where they're continuing to move the hips to the right in the backswing, or moving the hips to the right too long in the backswing, and they get up here, they're probably going to spin out and continue to steepen the shaft. So then we have to start feeling that the hips kind of bump to the right, turn, bump to the left. So then we start working on the pivot to try to improve the path of the club, right? So bumping right early, creating rotation, bumping left early. And you can see now my arms, it's much easier for me to lower my arms from the top of the swing. I can keep moving through and swing to the right. Really, until you start hitting the ball with a draw, you're just trying to do those feels, get the club face more closed, shallow the shaft, and then get the hips moving left early. Those should start to create draws. Once it starts to create maybe too much of a draw or an overdraw, then we can start really implementing things to help with the early extension or the rotation through. But along the way, you're going to hit better golf shots that are going further more at your target and shooting lower scores. Yeah, you'll probably still be going this way a little bit through impact, which isn't great, but essentially it's better than the club going this way and then going that way to try to get the club back to the inside. So face is more closed going back, shallow the club from the top, and then essentially from here what we would do is just push up and swing the arms back to the left. If we can create those positions, if we can create a draw, then we can start going inside on the way to the golf ball and then back to the inside on the way through. So the pivot working correctly would be bump to the right, back to the left, and you can see how that'll take my arms around my body. And again, now make it very easy for that club to swing inside the target line. And that ball is drawing quite a bit, right? It's probably overdrawing the target by about 10, 15 yards. But that's the progression I take a player through. If you're a steep player coming to see me, most likely you're hitting weak fades or slices, so we're going to get you to hit pulls. As you're hitting pulls, the ball's going farther. We aim you to the right. You shoot lower scores. Now we can, okay, let's start getting the club to lower. Now you start hitting draws, right? You're still early extending, so the draw turns into a hook. Now the ball's overdrawing the target, and then essentially we take the hook and we just turn it into a straight shot by then understanding how to maintain the hip depth and how to rotate through. But that's kind of the last piece of the puzzle. And for players who are wondering why they're having trouble steepening the shaft, I would go back to the beginning of this video or look at your golf swing and see, what does the club face look like very early on, right? Is the club behind my hands? Is the face very open, right? What's my grip look like? Is my grip weak that the club face is getting too open? And then what does it look like early in transition? Like, why am I moving the shaft this way very early on in my downswing? When we see issues that impact like early extension and flipping and the club moving too far to the left, there's typically causes very, very early on in the golf swing. That's why I said takeaway is one of the easiest things for a player to fix, one of the most important, because again, if we get the club started better, we're probably going to swing it better. And then we could start to sometimes intuitively develop more of that ideal swing plane where the club's more out here and then shallow. We don't need it to look like Matt Wolff, right? But in that feeling of getting that look, all of a sudden now my body starts working better, the club starts working better, I start hitting better golf shots. So again, club face out in front, left wrist flat, lower the shaft from the top of the swing. So as I do that move more and more, right, the ball continues to draw. Once I see that ball drawing or overdrawing consistently, then those are the players I start to work on really moving the hands back to the left, right? Trying to get that hand path exiting more left, typically by a sense of kind of pushing up off the left side or pushing the left hip back, and then just trying to create space for the hands to swing into. But most likely we were working away from that to start with, because if the club's out here from the top of the swing, club gets out here from the top of the swing, I'm probably swiping it low and left on the way through. So we essentially want to go the other way to start with and then kind of work backwards from there. If you have any questions about this, feel free to leave comments below. I'll put some of these clips on my Instagram as well too, so you'll keep seeing them on there as well too. But hopefully you enjoyed the video.